and Amanda's from the Immigration Defenders Law Center in LA, and she's going to tell us about their work and her work and the encounters. So go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name's Amanda Schuft, and I am a directing attorney at Immigrant Defenders Law Center. I work in our LA office, but we do have an office in San Diego that focuses on all the cross-border issues, responding to the migrant protection protocols, and I can talk a little bit more about that. Just an overview of what we do. We have several programs. Our largest program, we represent unaccompanied minors who are minors who come to the border or are apprehended by ICE within a certain time frame by the border, who are not with a parent, and ICE places them in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement and places them in removal proceedings. And we get connected with a lot of them. We do a lot of work in shelters here in the LA area, doing Know Your Rights presentations for the kids once they are in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And we represent all of those unaccompanied minors who are in those shelters within the LA and Riverside, San Bernardino area, and then the ones who are released to family in the areas we serve as well. I work on our adult representation team, and I work with our program, National Qualified Representatives. In that program, we represent individuals who have been found incompetent to represent themselves before an immigration judge and who are detained by ICE and unrepresented. And there's a Ninth Circuit injunction that requires the government provide representation, fund representation for those individuals. It came out of a lawsuit for a man whose case was actually terminated, but he suffered from pretty serious symptoms related to his mental health, and he didn't understand his case was terminated, and he was detained by ICE for 5 years after his case was terminated. So that resulted in a class action lawsuit, and now those individuals are represented by the government, funded by the government, subcontracted. And I work on our post-conviction relief team, and through that team, our Deported Veterans Legal Services. So I do know and work with Robert. And we also just have different funding sources to represent adults through the LA City and Santa Ana, Long Beach, different local governments, and through the state of California that have responded to the crisis in immigration and provided some funding for our community members to have attorneys in their immigration proceedings. In San Diego, our office really has focused largely on what's happening at the border and with the migrant protection protocols that the Trump administration put in place that changed the law around asylum, that previously you could come to the border, and that is what the law asked people to do, and claim a fear of return to your country of origin. And then you could pursue your asylum claim in the United States, though that may have been in the custody of ICE detention. However, as I'm sure many of you are aware, through the Trump administration, Title 42 and the migrant protection protocols, asylum seekers were forced to remain in Mexico, which created a very large humanitarian crisis that our San Diego office has tried to, respond to some extent. And Robert has actually worked with that team a lot when they go down to Tijuana to provide Know Your Rights presentations, just a general overview of the legal process that they're in, and what the basics of claiming asylum are, what things you need to prove. It's quite hard to establish eligibility for asylum because uh, you have to establish that you have been persecuted or will be persecuted on account of a protected ground. And it's that creating that nexus to the protected ground that's very difficult. Protected grounds include race, religion, political opinion, nationality, and membership in a particular social group. The issue for a lot of people is that they're facing widespread violence in their country, and they can't establish that the persecution or serious harm they face or have been threatened with is on account of that protected ground. And it's especially hard to do that if you don't have a lawyer and you don't understand what things you need to point out about your story, because if you have been threatened with death, seen friends or family members been killed, harmed, things like that, it seems if you shared that with a judge or with an immigration officer, they might understand that your life is at risk. But it's without establishing that connection, the reason to a protected ground, then the case won't go forward. And the likelihood of success on an asylum claim with an attorney is vastly higher than if you are unrepresented, especially if you are, kind of in a refugee camp without access to the information or the documents that would corroborate the testimony. Also, if you have a lawyer, they can help you prepare your testimony, all of those things, ask the questions that would help meet those legal requirements. But evidence is very important. And when people are in such a dangerous and unstable situation for many reasons, it's hard to gather the documentary evidence as well as to talk about what's happened. And a lot of people who have faced serious trauma, it's very, very difficult to talk about. So that, is an issue with asylum across the board, but especially for, the situation at the border in Tijuana and San Diego. So our cross-border initiative does try to serve as many people as possible by providing those Know Your Rights presentations. We do have funding to represent directly some people who are planning through the state of California to reside in California, if they're able to enter the United States to continue seeking asylum or are successful on an asylum claim. But, as with the situation in most places, the need for representation is, much, much, much higher than the funding and programming allows for. So we also engage in a lot of advocacy around these type of policies that are so make it so much harder for people to seek asylum and have the rights, the legal rights that they are entitled to under the law, that in our position have been violated by these Trump era policies. The Biden administration did announce that MPP will be ending in May. So, we're cautiously hopeful that will move forward and that people will be able to claim asylum within the United States and not from a refugee camp at the border. So I'm not sure if I can talk more about the work that we do, or I could pause for questions.
Let's pause for questions. When you say the government is providing some funds for you, what government?
For our work, the cross at the border.
Yeah, and legal aid. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the state of California has provided a lot of funding for removal defense throughout the state, not just our organization that receives that funding, but there are requirements regarding residency and ties to California. So a lot of people don't qualify for that funding. That's the same with our Deported Veteran Legal Services program, where I work with Robert. We're able to represent veterans who've been deported. We've had some successes recently of helping those clients get paroled back in, but there has to be a California tie, a prior residence, or part of the military service in California. With federal, we do have federal funding through the Franco Gonzalez class members, the National Qualified Representative Program for individuals who've been found incompetent. That's required by the Ninth Circuit injunction. It's a nationwide policies. And then we have federal funding through the Office of Refugee Resettlement to represent the unaccompanied minors. But a lot of our other work is funded. Like the city of Long Beach has a fund for residents of that city, the city of Santa Ana, the city and county of Los Angeles. Of course, you know, that funding, especially for a county like Los Angeles, is not going to allow for all the people who are in removal proceedings to have an attorney. And then private donations, things like that.
So do you know that the county of San Diego is starting to fund? Okay. I think they're just getting off their feet, but
Yeah.
okay, good. Are there other questions? Penny?
Yeah, so I'm just curious for asylum, if they will also consider seriously families who either have a youngster with severe autism and obviously in their own home country, one is at risk because of the way they're treated, and two would never get any kind of reasonable assessment and treatment there, or two, a major medical issue, a youngster with cerebral palsy or some other issue, or an individual. Are those justifications for asylum where they can get adequate support and treatment here?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to answer that question without getting too into the weeds of the law, but yes and no. So for our clients that have, you know, their severe mental health issues and related symptoms, we've had successfully been able to get many of those clients asylum. Not only Immigrant Defenders Law Center does this work, but nonprofits around the country, that the mental health and related symptoms qualify as a protected ground under the particular social group. To establish a particular social group, you have to show that it's considered a group within the society that the person is coming from, that the group has definable boundaries, and that it's based on an immutable characteristic, something that you cannot change or should not have to change. So for something like autism,
Right.
yes, if you can establish that that is a group in the country, also that there is a likelihood of persecution or past persecution. For a family member, you would have to tie it to the person who has the diagnosis and symptoms. And then, but for a health issue, there is established case law that, like, diabetes and having diabetes and being unable to get treatment is not a basis for asylum.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Just, that's okay. You don't need your insulin. Goodness
Yeah.
gracious. Interesting. Do you advocate for some of this? I mean, are you looking to change that in any way?
Well, I mean, the protected grounds for asylum are within the Immigration and Nationality Act, so Congress would have to change that to expand it. we, through case law, that particular social group is defined further by the courts. And, it has, I think, restricted over the years. And the protected grounds within asylum were in response initially to after World War II. And it's a very different situation now with the kind of harms and violence that people are facing that is so widespread that you may not be able to attach to one of those protected grounds, although the risk is so high for many people.
Mm-hmm. Beryl, I think there's a few of us that have our hands up. And I think Jane, you were ahead of me, so you go ahead.
No, I think you're first. I think I'm second. After
All right. Okay. Amanda, thank you so much for taking the morning out. I have two questions. The first one, you mentioned that in May, the federal government is looking at lifting the MPP, or the Remain in Mexico program.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because what I've heard is they're also going to lift the Title 42 if politics allows.
Yes.
So you're saying that both those programs will be not in place, I guess.
I think that's the hope, but where, we've seen policies be announced and then enjoined by federal courts. So cautious optimism.
Okay. Because I think Texas always seems to get involved. Texas. Yeah. Thank you. So, okay. If all goes well, then that may happen as far as the Biden administration goes. Okay. And then my second question, and I apologize a little bit for my ignorance, is that I volunteer with Jewish Family Services and the Rapid Response Network, and in the migrant shelter. And right now, obviously what we're seeing the most of are Ukrainians now at the shelter. And are they actually seeking asylum, or can they come and like there's that temporary status and go back, or what? Do you know how are they coming in? Are they requesting asylum, do you think? Because they may want to go back. Do you know, Amanda?
So I mean, every person's situation is different. So yeah, there are some people that would want the ability to go back. A lot, I think the majority who are migrating to the border to claim asylum would not want to go back because they've, been persecuted, fear persecution, been threatened, seen things happen. There are sweeps going on in El Salvador right now because there's so much gang violence that's kind of indiscriminate, and gangs then retaliate to that. So I guess I was speaking specifically to the Ukrainians that are coming. So humanitarian parole is a way to apply for an entry without having a legal status. And there's not a lot of, I guess, qualifications or information about how those applications will be processed, except to say there's an urgent humanitarian need and it's in the public benefit. So they'll consider things like the violence that people are facing, their reasons for coming, and then they always do an analysis of what's in the public benefit, is there a security risk, and they have, if anyone has criminal history, it's going to make it much harder because they're going to look at those things. So we have seen, there was an exception made for Ukrainians, which is great, but it's not provided to everyone. Yeah, that was clear. There was a good article in the Union Tribune a week ago or so about that. Yeah. Some of the unjust decisions being made. But yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, and humanitarian parole is also how, Robert can expand on this too. We've been able to get some deported veterans back in the United States while we're still working on the legal grounds for more permanent solution. But yeah, humanitarian parole is temporary.
Okay, thank you.
Dana, my daughter took in 2 girls from Afghanistan. They don't have any kind of status still. So, they're waiting for the rules.
Yeah, and they were allowed in for humanitarian, I guess, parole.
I have no
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Jane.
Okay. There's been a lot of news in the last month, and I've come to learn to keep a real eye on what the Department of Justice and Homeland Security are saying. And I know on March 24th, they issued a new rule in order to have more efficient processing of asylum claims that will allow US immigration officers to determine asylum cases. And this will go into effect presumably at the end of May too. I think it seems to be kind of linked to the Title 42 thing. I wanted to know what you think of that new rule. I also understand there's been, a lot in the budget to expand the number of officers, but what is your agency thinking about that?
That I don't want to speak about our agency's position too much because that doesn't directly relate to the work that I do. So I don't want to misspeak here, but anytime there's a possibility for someone to present their case that's in a non-adversarial setting, that can be helpful for them. The difference between representing, so the unaccompanied minors, for example, they have an exception. They are placed in removal proceedings, but they're allowed to file their asylum claims through the asylum office, which is the affirmative way to claim asylum. You go and you have an interview with an asylum officer in their office, and there's not a judge, it's a much less intimidating setting, and there's not an ICE attorney, so that ICE is the prosecuting agency of the immigration laws, and their job is to enforce the immigration laws. So doing a cross-examination, looking to discredit a story or find holes in a story, there's not a prosecutor there, and that's what it is like for a defensive claim. And I don't know if anyone has experience working with individuals who have suffered from trauma and things like that, but an ability to tell a linear story is greatly impacted by trauma and having to retell a story and things like that. So can often come off as not credible in an adversarial situation like that, especially where someone doesn't have counsel. So I think that's a positive. A concern, I guess, with doing it that way is there's not the same type of record created as there is in a court. So being able to have a review of how and why decisions are made is not quite the same when someone is doing an interview before an immigration officer.
Okay, thanks.
Who else? Wendy, go ahead. Wendy?
Yeah, I had to push buttons. I kind of have 2 questions as I sit here, and there's kind of 2 levels. There's the human everyday level, and there's kind of policy, organizational, administrative level. So my questions are really on the human level, and right now I'm forgetting one, of course, but when I think about this process, particularly those from Central America, what kind of documents do people actually show that defend their position? Because if I'm leaving a traumatic / stressful environment, how do I have to be pretty with it to gather a newspaper article or to get a written document from somebody? Or what kind of documents are presented in real life? What happens? What's it look like?
You're exactly right. Usually not, because people are fleeing a very scary and traumatic situation. And so that's another reason why having a lawyer can make such a big difference, because we are able to search for those news articles, even if they're not directly related to someone, to corroborate their story and request records, sometimes through the consulate, sometimes we are able to get like death certificates, things like that, if they've had a family member killed. But yeah, if someone, especially for the people that were not allowed to claim asylum within the United States, to even once you're there start to get those records, it's very hard. In addition, there's an application form itself. It's in English. There's a lot of information that it calls for. And now immigration judges are allowed to pre-terminate cases if what they get from a person doesn't kind of outline a viable claim. So, yeah.
So I'm kind of hearing two roles for volunteers. One is, with probably a little bit of training, and the question is client privilege or protection. Volunteers doing the computer work, searching, and number two, volunteers sitting with the person and filling out their form, or even just helping them gel their story so they can present a more cogent argument to even their lawyer, for instance, if they have representation. The other question, and it's the same type of question, is when you say that so-and-so was detained for 5 years in this country, and one of my beefs before I was even educated about this stuff was, why is it taking so crazy long to go from an application to due process, meaning years? And this is pre-Trump, this is probably pre-Obama that I had that awareness. So this fella that was in detention for 5 years, is he basically in what looks like a minimum security jail for 5 years? Or where does one live for that period of time under those kind of circumstances?
It is like a prison, ICE detention.
Okay.
So there are many very large ICE detention centers in California. They're oftentimes in lower populated areas. So there's a large one in Adelanto, California, which is in the high desert, about an hour and a half northeast of Los Angeles. There are two in the Central Valley, Mesa Verde and Golden State Annex. There is one in Imperial. And then there are many local facilities that contract with ICE as well, like county jails, things like that. But, ICE detention is not as regulated as like some prison systems. So people don't get to go outside every day. Sometimes it's just an hour every other day. There aren't access to services, mental health services, aside from medication, because they have to provide people medical services, but there's not like therapy, there isn't rehabilitative services, all the type of things that people do have access to if they are incarcerated. But the actual setting is the same.
Yeah, that was my expectation. So just in terms of my looking at it, number one, we taxpayers are basically paying to put these people in prison versus prosecuting or carrying out their cases. And the second one is for those that didn't watch I'm not saying this is a League of Women Voters, but there was a seminar deal last night with the county applicants for sheriff. And I understood one of the applicants to basically say he would have a close relationship with ICE. Just FYI.
Well, all of
who's going to win?
Really. Yeah, that was scary.
Did you have that same impression, Burl?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
only one that said he would, try to get around ICE. Okay, who else has a question? Penny, you had another. Oh, no, Jim, go ahead.
Thanks, Burl. Thank you, Amanda. Sort of a follow-up question to what Wendy was raising about documents and other supporting information. Does your organization collaborate with, for example, Innovation Law Lab or El Otro Lado in Tijuana or Border Angels? And where do you get referrals? How do you find your people? Are they referrals from Kind or other organizations? How do you find them? Thanks.
Yes, probably to most of those questions. So yeah, in this work, the organizations all do collaborate on evidence gathering as far as country conditions, case strategy for asylum. Absolutely, we collaborate with Al Otro Lado, and we do work with Innovation Law Lab on our cross-border initiative specifically. And sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Just in terms of referrals for your clients, how do you find your people to represent them?
Yeah, so a lot of different ways, family members refer friends, through word of mouth with, Robert has referred us many clients, and then people can access referrals through our website, and through volunteers reaching out who've met with someone. And volunteers can be really helpful for helping people gather documents. Evidence gathering is a big part of these cases, and it takes a lot of time. So the more, support we can get with that, sometimes the easier it is to step in on a case.
Thank you. Do you have a mechanism in place for volunteers like the Santa Fe Dreamers Project and EPIC in El Paso? They have a network of volunteers who do telephone intakes with people in detention centers to do some of the preliminary groundwork, fill out a bunch of paper forms and send them to the lawyers, which saves you folks time.
Yeah, we have a volunteer email. So let me just find it. It's just volunteer@mdef.org. And you can find out more from our volunteer coordinator exactly what work we do. I'm going to put it in the chat. But I also, you have Margaret's contact, and Margaret directs our San Diego office. So any additional questions about how volunteers are connected specifically with our San Diego team, Margaret can give a little more information on that. I know she was busy this morning. She's doing a Know Your Rights presentation. So
Yeah, I have that. I'll put that in the notes. Thank you. All right. Did you have another question, Penny?
Yeah, in terms of Title 42, is that, I guess I got the impression that Trump just put it in place, obviously because of COVID and so on. So I guess I'm a little bit confused why Biden can't just essentially remove it. Like, what's the process? Is it all political at this point? What is the process to get rid of it?
So I can drop some information into the chat. But it is Title 42 is a statute, and here's some information about the ending of Title 42. Okay. Sorry. So the executive branch is able to make policies around immigration, but within the court system, the court can enjoin. So the same thing with DACA. President Obama, announced this policy, and then the Trump administration tried to cancel it, and then the federal courts intervene and say this is unlawful. and it can go up through the court system. So that's what has happened, you know, as in administrations change.
Yeah.
And with the ending of enacting new policies, those can also, or, you know, trying to end policies, those decisions can also get challenged within the federal court system.
Well, there's a bill in Congress that the Republicans or in the Senate trying to keep 42, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Wendy, I want to tell you that we try to take tours to the Immigration Detention Center, but they won't let visitors in yet. But it's on my radar. Okay, so Amanda, what are the courts like now? Is the public allowed to watch? Is it back to normal?
No, it is not back to normal yet. So they're doing a lot of hearings in the non-detained setting over WebEx, and actually wanting to do people's hearings where they are testifying regarding whatever claim they have. Maybe it's asylum for some people who've been in the United States. There's other claims on via WebEx, not even in person. Within the detention center courts, those are in person, but even if we want to bring another attorney to observe, a new attorney, we have to file a motion with the court that the judge has to grant to have an observer there right now. So it is not back to normal yet, but I think, you know, things will become more and more in person.
Okay. Anything else for Amanda?
Yeah, well, it's more for just the group, and I think it's already kind of been talked about, is the possibility that May 23rd, Title 42 might not really expire, because not only is it being contested in court and legislation, but you even have members of Mr. Biden's own party, such as Senators Kelly and Sinema in Arizona, who aren't thrilled with the ending of Title 42 because of this supposed stress that would cause on the system. And then you've got all the backlog of separate track, because it's not asylum, but the processing of all the Ukrainian citizens and whatnot. And I guess I just wanted to discuss with you as to whether you think in the next month it you know, what are the chances that Title 42 may not end on May 23rd, and what kind of things we might be wanting to do to ensure that happen, or to show that perhaps the community, I know there's the rapid response and JFS, et cetera, can be ready. So.
Yeah, so because I don't work directly with Title 42 cases, I represent people who are here in removal proceedings. I don't think I'm the best person to give my judgment on the likelihood that it will in fact end on May 23rd. I know that, yeah, Senators Sinema and Kelly are not aligned with the party on that one. Probably, you know, because if they were, they would not have as good a chance of getting reelected in Arizona at this point. So I think we could follow up with Margaret. Margaret is in a much better position to give her position on that.
Okay, I mean, one never knows. My question is, how does the US get away with all this if it's against the international law?
Well, international law isn't binding at the end of the day. on and the US is in a position to take, you know, the negative. I mean, whatever countries will think that's a negative decision because, you know, we have a big economy and powerful nation. So yeah, I mean, with the definition of particular social group in asylum, international human rights groups have said the way that the courts have interpreted that so narrowly is not in line with the international law that created asylum. And, you know, that doesn't, it's not binding and it's not very persuasive for a lot of judges within the court system at this time.
But is it against US law? I mean, don't
For-
we have a law that says anybody can seek asylum? And
Yes, that's that's our position. That is a violation of US law. But that's why, you know, it was done under a public safety reasoning.
Beryl?
yes, Jane.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Penny's comment or question about Title 42. I mean, we have to be realistic about how political this issue is. You know, even within the Biden administration, there was a very good article last week, I'll find it, about the division within his team on immigration, Title 42. There's enormous fear of what will happen, you know, what kind of a surge at the border there will be, how that will be experienced politically with an election coming up. You know, I think it's a very tricky political issue for the Democrats right now. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are issues, a lot of issues in immigration that don't have the full support of progressive or Democratic groups. It's really difficult. And so I think, you know, for Biden and his administration to maintain, you know, some level of popularity, they can't say, oh, you know, they're going to say we are very concerned about this public safety and public health issue, because a lot of Democrats feel that way.
Dana, did you have another comment?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on Jane's comment because I think what it appears to me also, and you know, again, I'm by no means an expert or you know, involved in this directly, but that I'm not sure if the Biden administration is ready for all of the, you know, once they lift Title 42 and remain in Mexico, do they have the judges? Do they have all the staff to process all this? And I think that could be part of the concern on the Democrats. I mean, if they knew that we had a system in place that actually worked, you know, then maybe there'd be a bit more support. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
And I had heard somewhere again that they were going to do it slowly. It wasn't going to be, okay, suddenly the door is open, that there will be kind of, you know, some kind of a line, I guess. And also that they're expanding centers and staff.
That's good to hear.
I mean, no one ever just gets like let into the United States. They would be processed and paroled in to claim asylum, and of course, like at a port of entry. So there's a lot of administrative work. It's not like they can just like open the doors and the 50,000 people that are stuck in refugee camps at the border are all going to come running in. And there's, you know, processing and things like that. For a lot of people, they will end up being detained by ICE, and that's what happened before, especially a lot of adult men. It's more often like women and children may end up in a detention center for some time, but are released and things like that. But a lot of people are allowed to claim asylum from the United States, but it is within a detention center. And there is never, their claim may be denied, they may be deported, they never are actually free in the United States.
That's too bad.
Are more people being given ankle bracelets instead of being put in detention centers like ICE claims?
Mm.
I think that the detention numbers have gone down specifically in California because there was a lot of district court litigation by many different groups collaborating together around the safety issue of having so many people in such close quarters during a pandemic. For that reason, detention numbers have gone down. And that's not the same trend nationwide. So I think, in cities, there are directives from above, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of power that local people and local head of agencies have on those kind of discretionary determinations, because with the Biden administration has released enforcement priorities as far as like who should be detained by ICE, who should be targeted for initiation of removal proceedings in the immigration court. And they give room to place someone in the category of an enforcement priority or not. It's a consideration of many factors.
Okay, well, Amanda, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. Your
Yes.
input is really important to
Thank
us.
you. And I'm sorry that my work doesn't focus on the issues specific to Title 42 and MPP, but I'm sure if there's follow-up questions, you can reach out to Margaret, and
Sure, yeah.
she is more knowledgeable in that area than I am.
Okay, all right. Well, you're doing plenty.
Thanks.
I appreciate having your time